I need to show you something that doesn't add up. Between 1863 and 1916, 3 massive transcontinental railways were built across some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. The first Transcontinental Railroad in the United States, built in 6 years. The Canadian Pacific Railway, built in 4 years. The Trans-Siberian Railway, built in 25 years. These weren't short commuter lines. These were continent-spanning railways covering thousands of miles through mountains, deserts, frozen tundra, and impenetrable forests. And here's what bothers me. They were all built using 19th century technology. Hand tools, shovels, pickaxes, black powder, horse-drawn carts, no bulldozers, no excavators, no diesel engines, no power tools, just men with shovels and dynamite laying track across entire continents. And they did it ahead of schedule. Let me start with the numbers, because the numbers are what made me stop and question everything. The first Transcontinental Railroad in the United States was authorized in 1862. Construction began in 1863. It was completed in 1869. 6 years to build 1,912 miles of continuous railroad track across the American West. The Union Pacific built west from Nebraska. The Central Pacific built east from California. They met in the middle at Promontory Summit, Utah, on May 10, 1869. The route crossed the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains, and the Sierra Nevada. It included crossing major rivers, blasting through solid rock, and bridging deep canyons. Total workforce: about 20,000 to 25,000 workers at peak, mostly Chinese immigrants on the Central Pacific side, Irish immigrants and Civil War veterans on the Union Pacific side. They built this with hand tools and black powder explosives. The average pace was about 300 miles per year. In the final year alone, the Central Pacific laid 560 miles of track. On April 28, 1869, Chinese workers for the Central Pacific set a world record by laying over 10 miles of track in a single day. 10 miles in one day. By hand. The project finished ahead of schedule and under budget. The Canadian Pacific Railway started construction in 1881. It was completed in 1885. 4 years to build 4,900 kilometers of track from Montreal to Vancouver, through the Canadian Shield, through the Rocky Mountains, across the prairies in winter conditions that regularly dropped to minus 40 degrees. The workforce peaked at around 17,000 laborers, including Chinese workers who were brought in specifically for the most dangerous sections through British Columbia's mountains. The original deadline was 1891. They finished 6 years early. William Van Horn, who was hired to oversee construction in 1882, promised to build 800 kilometers of track in his first year. Everyone thought he was insane. He built 672 kilometers of main line plus sidings and branch lines. The following year, 1883, they reached the Rocky Mountains. By 1885, the entire transcontinental route was finished. 4 years. Nearly 5,000 kilometers through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the world, using 19th century construction methods. But the Trans-Siberian Railway is where things get really interesting. Construction officially began in 1891. It was completed in 1916. 25 years to build 9,289 kilometers, 5,772 miles, the longest railway in the world. The route crossed 3 time zones. It traversed the Siberian taiga, where temperatures dropped to minus 60 degrees Celsius in winter. It crossed massive rivers, the Ob, the Yenisei, the Lena, the Amur. It had to navigate around Lake Baikal, the world's deepest lake, surrounded by sheer cliffs. They built 39 tunnels through solid rock, over 100 kilometers of bridges, more than 50 protection galleries against landslides, peak workforce, over 90,000 laborers, soldiers, convicts, peasants from across Russia, working in conditions so brutal that thousands died during construction. And despite all of this, the frozen ground, the impassable forests, the vast distances, the construction proceeded at an average pace of 740 kilometers per year. The Guinness Book of Records lists the Trans-Siberian Railway for the fastest pace of construction for a railway of its size, built with hand tools, shovels, axes, and saws. In the first decade alone, 1891 to 1901, they laid over 7,000 kilometers of track. Now, let me be very clear about something. I'm not saying these railways weren't built. The construction is documented. We have photographs, we have records, we have first-hand accounts from workers, we have financial scandals, labor disputes, deaths, accidents. The railways were definitely built. What I'm asking is, were they built from scratch, or were they built on top of something that was already there? Think about what was required to build these railways. First, you need surveying. You need to map the route. Through thousands of miles of unmapped wilderness, you need to find the optimal path. Through mountains, you need to locate passes. Across rivers, you need to identify crossing points. The Trans-Siberian Railway survey began in 1887. 3 expeditions spent 4 years mapping potential routes. Except, here's the problem. When they began construction in 1891, they already knew exactly where to build. No trial and error, no major route changes. They just started laying track. The Canadian Pacific Railway had the same thing. They needed to find a pass through the Rocky Mountains. Major Albert Bowman Rogers was assigned to find it. In 1881, he discovered Rogers Pass. But how did he know where to look? The Rocky Mountains are vast. Finding a usable pass through solid rock should take decades of exploration. He found it in one expedition. The first Transcontinental Railroad in the United States was authorized in 1862. By 1863, they were laying track. Somehow, in a single year, they had surveyed the entire route, secured land rights, organized logistics, and begun construction. It's as if the routes were already known. Let me show you what's required to actually build a railroad. First, clear the land. Remove trees, brush, rocks, grade the terrain. You need a relatively level surface for miles and miles of continuous track. Second, build the bed. Lay down a foundation. In some places, this meant filling in valleys. In other places, cutting through hills, creating a stable, drained roadbed that won't shift or flood. Third, lay the ties. Wooden crossbeams that hold the rails. Each tie weighs about 200 pounds. They're spaced 19 to 20 inches apart. For 1,000 miles of track, you need about 3 million ties. Fourth, lay the rails. Iron or steel rails, each weighing 500 pounds or more, placed precisely parallel, exactly 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart. They have to be level. They have to be secured to the ties with spikes. Fifth, ballast, crushed rock laid around the ties to provide drainage and stability. Then, build bridges, construct tunnels, install telegraph lines, build stations, create maintenance facilities, and you have to do all of this over hundreds or thousands of miles, often through terrain where there are no existing roads, no nearby towns, no supply lines. The Trans-Siberian Railway moved 100 million cubic meters of rock and earth. They laid 12 million railway sleepers. They installed 1 million tons of rails, all by hand, in 25 years. But here's what really made me start questioning the official narrative. The construction photographs. I've looked at hundreds of construction photos from all 3 railways, and there's a pattern. In almost every photo, you see workers laying track on ground that's already graded. The roadbed is already level. The drainage is already in place. You never see the actual grading work in progress. You see workers laying ties and rails. You see bridges being built. You see tunnels being blasted. But you don't see the massive earth-moving operation that would be required to create level ground through mountains and forests. The photos show the finishing work, not the foundation. It's like watching someone install hardwood floors without ever seeing them pour the foundation or frame the house. Let me tell you about something that happened in 1893. The Circum-Baikal Railway, the section of the Trans-Siberian that goes around the southern shore of Lake Baikal, was supposed to be one of the most difficult sections to build. The shore is nothing but sheer cliffs dropping straight into the lake. The rock is granite. They would need to blast through solid mountain, build retaining walls, construct dozens of tunnels, and create a railway bed where no flat ground existed. Everyone agreed this section would take a decade at minimum, possibly longer. They started construction in 1901. They finished in 1905. 4 years to build 260 kilometers of railway through terrain that should have been impossible. 39 tunnels, over 15 kilometers of retaining walls, hundreds of stone support structures, with hand tools and black powder. And when you look at photographs of the Circum-Baikal Railway, you see something strange. The stonework is perfect. The arches are symmetrical. The retaining walls are precisely fitted. The tunnels are perfectly round, with smooth walls and consistent dimensions. This is supposed to be emergency construction, rushed to meet a deadline. But it looks like architecture, like it was designed to last centuries, like it was built by master craftsmen with unlimited time, not by convict laborers working with picks and shovels in 4 years. Here's another thing that doesn't add up. The bridges. The Khabarovsk Bridge across the Amur River on the Trans-Siberian Railway was constructed between 1913 and 1916. It's 2.6 kilometers long. It's 64 meters high. It has 18 spans, each one 127 meters across. It used 17,800 tons of metal. This bridge was built in 3 years in Siberia, where the river freezes solid for half the year and temperatures can drop to minus 40 degrees. The official story is that they constructed massive stone pillars in the riverbed, then assembled the steel spans on top. But look at the pillars. They're enormous. Each one required hundreds of tons of stone to be quarried, transported, and precisely positioned underwater in a fast-moving river. How do you do that with 19th century technology in 3 years? You'd need to work year-round, but you can't work in a frozen river. You can't work when the temperature is 40 below. You can't work during spring floods. You'd have maybe 4 months of viable construction weather per year. That's 12 months total over 3 years. 12 months to build a 2.6-kilometer bridge with 18 massive stone pillars and steel spans weighing thousands of tons each. Does that seem physically possible with the technology available in 1913? Let me show you what really made me start questioning everything. In 1904, the Sludyanka 1 station was built on the shore of Lake Baikal. The entire station is made of marble, not decorated with marble, made entirely of marble. The walls, the floors, the roof tiles, everything. It was conceived as a monument to crown the completion of the Circum-Baikal Railway. Marble is one of the most difficult materials to work with. It's heavy, brittle, and requires skilled craftsmanship to cut, shape, and install properly. Building an entire railway station from marble would be a major undertaking even today. They built it in 1904 in the middle of Siberia as a minor station on a railway line. Who builds an entire railway station from marble in the wilderness? Who has the craftsmen skilled enough to do that kind of work? Who transports tons of marble to the middle of nowhere? Unless the station was already there, unless they found it, restored it, and claimed they built it. Now here's where it gets even stranger. The Trans-Siberian Railway wasn't the first railway in the region. Not officially, anyway. There are historical records of earlier railway attempts in Siberia dating back to the 1850s and 1860s. Local projects, short lines connecting mines to rivers. These were supposedly abandoned or incomplete. But what if they weren't abandoned? What if they were parts of a much larger network that already existed? The official history says the Trans-Siberian was built to connect European Russia to the Pacific, to exploit Siberian resources, to colonize the Far East. But Russia had been present in Siberia for centuries. Russian explorers reached the Pacific in the 1600s. Trading posts, forts, and settlements stretched across Siberia long before the railway. How were those settlements supplied? How did people travel? The official answer is by river in summer, by sled in winter. Along the Great Siberian Route, a network of roads and paths that connected Siberia to European Russia. Except the Great Siberian Route was notoriously unreliable. Rivers freeze, roads become impassable mud in spring and fall. Travel time from Moscow to Vladivostok could take a year or more. So how did a vast territory with millions of people function for centuries with such poor transportation? Maybe they had better transportation than we're told. Let me tell you about the timing. The Trans-Siberian Railway construction began in 1891. That's the same period when Tartary disappeared from maps. Tartary, or Tartaria, appeared on European maps for centuries. It covered Siberia and Central Asia. By the 1890s, it was gone, replaced by terms like Russian Siberia, Turkestan, Mongolia. In 1944, according to a 1957 CYA document, the Soviet government issued an order for scientific revision of Tartaria history. Why revise the history of a place that supposedly never existed? Unless it did exist, unless there was infrastructure, like railways, that needed to be explained away. Claim the railways were built in the 1890s and early 1900s. Destroy or ignore evidence of earlier construction. Rewrite the maps. Rename the territory. Within a generation, nobody remembers there was ever a railway network in Tartaria, because officially, Tartaria never existed. Let me be completely honest about what I can and cannot prove. Can prove. The Trans-Siberian Railway was constructed between 1891 and 1916. Construction was documented with photos, records, financial data. The pace of construction was remarkably fast, 740 kilometers per year. The terrain was extremely difficult. Permafrost, taiga, mountains, rivers. The technology was 19th century, hand tools, black powder, horses. Multiple sections were completed ahead of schedule. Thousands of workers died during construction. Cannot prove that earlier railway infrastructure already existed, that the construction was actually restoration or expansion, that Tartaria had a pre-existing railway network, that maps were deliberately altered to hide this, that survey work was unnecessary because routes were already known. What I can say is this. The official narrative requires us to believe that with 19th century technology, massive continent-spanning railways were built through the world's harshest terrain in timeframes that challenge credibility. And that's not speculation, that's math. Let me walk you through what should have been required. The Trans-Siberian Railway, 9,289 kilometers, built in 25 years. That's 371 kilometers per year, every year, for 25 consecutive years. But construction wasn't continuous. Work stopped in winter when temperatures dropped to minus 60 degrees Celsius. Work stopped during spring floods. Work slowed during storms. So the actual construction season was maybe 6 to 7 months per year. Call it 200 working days. That means they needed to build 1.86 kilometers per day. every single working day for 25 years. 1.86 kilometers per day means clearing land, grading terrain, laying foundation, placing ties, installing rails, ballasting track, and moving all equipment and materials forward, all by hand, with teams of workers spread across thousands of miles, all working simultaneously, all maintaining the same pace. Does that sound possible? The first Transcontinental Railroad in the United States, 1,912 miles in 6 years. But really, it was built in about 4 years of active construction, because the Civil War delayed the Union Pacific's work until 1865. 1,912 miles in 4 years is 478 miles per year. That's 1.3 miles per day during the construction season. And again, this is through mountain ranges, across deserts, over rivers. In the Sierra Nevada, they had to blast through solid granite. In Nevada and Utah, they crossed barren deserts where there was no water, no timber, no local resources. Everything had to be shipped in from California, or from the East Coast via ship around South America. Rail iron came from England and Pennsylvania. Locomotives came from eastern factories. Tools, food, equipment, all shipped thousands of miles to remote construction sites, and somehow they maintained a pace of over a mile per day. The Canadian Pacific Railway, 4,900 kilometers in 4 years, 1,225 kilometers per year, through the Canadian Shield, billion-year-old granite, through the Rocky Mountains, some of the most rugged terrain in North America, across frozen plains where winter temperatures make outdoor work nearly impossible. In 1882, William Van Horn's first year, they built 672 kilometers of track, plus sidings and branches. 672 kilometers in one construction season, with 19th century technology. That's 3.7 kilometers per day. Nearly 4 kilometers of graded, leveled, drained roadbed. 4 kilometers of ties placed. 4 kilometers of rail installed every day. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it requires us to accept that 19th century laborers were far more productive than anyone working today with modern equipment. Today, with bulldozers, excavators, GPS surveying, welded rail, and diesel engines, major railway projects take decades. The California High-Speed Rail project has been under construction since 2015 and still isn't finished. But in 1882, with shovels and pickaxes, they built 672 kilometers in one season. Either 19th century workers were superhuman, or there's something about the official narrative that doesn't add up. Let me show you one more thing that bothers me: the uniformity. All 3 transcontinental railways, built in different countries, different time periods, different contexts, use the exact same track gauge, 4 feet, 8.5 inches. This measurement is called standard gauge. It was adopted by most railways in the 19th century. But why that specific measurement? It's an odd number, not a clean 4 feet or 5 feet, not a metric measurement. The official explanation is that it was based on the width of Roman chariots, which influenced the width of British wagon ruts, which influenced early British railways, which became the standard everyone copied. But here's the thing. If each railway was independently designed and built, why would they all use the same gauge? The Trans-Siberian was a Russian government project. Russia uses the metric system. Why not use a round metric gauge like 1.5 meters? The Canadian Pacific could have used any gauge they wanted. They were building from scratch across empty wilderness. Why lock into British standard gauge? Unless the gauge was predetermined. Unless there was existing infrastructure that dictated the measurements. Unless they were building on a foundation that was already there. Here's what really got me thinking. The Trans-Siberian Railway initially planned to use a 5-foot gauge wider than standard gauge. Russia's earlier railways used 5-foot gauge because it was thought to be more stable. But when construction began in 1891, they switched to standard 4 feet, 8.5 inches gauge. Why? The official explanation is that they wanted compatibility with European railways, but the Trans-Siberian doesn't directly connect to European railways. There's a gauge break at the Russian border. To this day, trains have to change bogies when crossing between Russia and Europe because Russia still uses a different gauge for its western railways. So why did they use standard gauge in Siberia, unless they were matching something that was already there? Let me tell you about a theory, because that's all this is, a theory. What if, in the mid-1800s, there was already a transcontinental railway network across Siberia? What if that network was built by a civilization we now call Tartaria? What if that civilization, for reasons we don't understand, collapsed, was destroyed, or was systematically erased from history? The railways would have still been there, the roadbeds, the bridges, the tunnels, damaged maybe, overgrown, but there. In the 1850s through 1890s, European powers and Russia encountered this infrastructure. Instead of acknowledging it, they claimed to be building it. Construction was actually restoration. Finding existing routes, clearing overgrown tracks, rebuilding damaged bridges, laying new rails on old roadbeds. That would explain the speed. It's much faster to restore than to build from scratch. That would explain the perfect knowledge of routes. They weren't surveying, they were following what was already there. That would explain the stonework that looks too good for frontier construction. It was too good, because it wasn't built by convict laborers. It was built by whoever came before. Now, can I prove this? No. The evidence is circumstantial. The questions are legitimate, but the answers are speculative. What I can prove is that the official narrative requires accepting some pretty extraordinary claims. That 19th century workers with hand tools outperform modern construction equipment. That continent-spanning surveys were completed in impossibly short time frames. That major engineering projects in the most hostile environments on Earth were finished ahead of schedule. That the routes were perfect on the first try with minimal errors or redesigns. That 3 separate countries on 3 separate continents all independently chose the same unusual track gauge. You can believe that. Many people do. The official history is documented and widely accepted. Or you can ask, what if we're looking at this backwards? What if the great railway projects of the 19th century weren't the beginning of transcontinental rail travel? What if they were the end of it? The moment when existing infrastructure was appropriated, rebranded, and claimed by new powers rising from the ruins of whatever came before. The Trans-Siberian Railway still runs today. Trains leave Moscow every day, crossing 8 time zones, arriving in Vladivostok a week later. The route hasn't changed much since 1916. Same bridges, same tunnels. Many of the original stations still stand. If you ride it today, you'll see stone retaining walls that look ancient, bridges that seem over-engineered for their purpose, stations built with a grandeur that makes no sense for their remote locations. And you'll pass through regions that used to be called Tartary on old maps. Regions where the official history claims there was nothing but empty wilderness before the Russians arrived. But maybe there wasn't nothing. Maybe there were cities and roads and railways. Maybe the Trans-Siberian Railway didn't connect empty territory. Maybe it connected the remnants of a civilization we've been told never existed. And maybe the same is true for the American and Canadian transcontinental railways. Maybe they weren't pioneering routes through virgin wilderness. Maybe they were reclaiming routes that had been used for centuries, or longer. I can't prove it. But I also can't ignore the questions. Why was construction so fast? Why were routes known so precisely? Why does the stonework look too perfect? Why did Tartary disappear from maps at the exact moment these railways were being built? Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe 19th century engineers were just that good. Or maybe we've been told a story about building railways when the real story was about finding them. The tracks are still there. The bridges still stand. The tunnels still cut through mountains. They were definitely there in 1891 when construction officially began. But how long had they been there before that? That's the question nobody wants to ask, but it's the question that won't go away.